All right, we're into part 3 of Hawthorne's The Blithedale Romance. The saga continues. We're going to do at least one more episode. I'm at the point where, this is just enjoyable to me. I hope you're enjoying it too. I'm trying to, intersperse and sort of sprinkle in there some of the very relevant themes, but I got to admit, the plot just has me drawn in once again, so I hope it's doing the same for you. I know it's not the same hearing it as it is reading it, but we're doing our best. I want to mention at the start that I just watched I think Arvol's latest video, and it's very good. And I think I'll have time left at the end to comment just a little bit if I can recall. And I think it's kind of, in my mind, it's kind of related to some of the things I've been thinking about in Hawthorne, or what's relevant in Hawthorne. I'm not going to do the review. You have to watch parts 1 and 2 of this, episodes 70.1 and 70.2 of the Godward podcast if you want to catch up. This is 70.3. Let's go. All right, no. We are not going to finish the novel in this episode. Too much is happening. And for real, I forgot how good this book is. Also, if you are a thumbnail appreciator, you got to hand it to me for this one, right? Join my Patreon. Okay, let's go. This is part 3, as I said, but very quick and sweeping overview. I guess I'll give you this much, okay? We've got our 4 main characters, which includes the weird love triangle between 17-year-old waifish, pale Priscilla, 24-year-old literary elitist Zenobia, and bearded 30-year-old alpha obsessed with prison reform Hollingsworth. And then we have our narrator, Miles Coverdale. They're all leftoids, I want to be clear here. This isn't right-wing Twitter commune. It's a progressive, almost European-inspired, transcendentalist, New England utopian farm, okay? So in the background, there's, as I mentioned in parts 1 and 2, there's this story of the veiled lady who, as it's presented initially, may or may not be something Priscilla did before she comes to Blithedale. Okay, then there's Mr. Moody and Professor Westervelt, both of whom seem interested particularly in the fates of Zenobia and Priscilla for reasons that Coverdale does not understand, and therefore we don't understand as readers. Now, chapter 14 takes place on a Sunday. Actually, the Sunday morning after that strange day where Zenobia told her story of the silvery veil that I tried to summarize, where at the end of it she throws the veil on Priscilla. So the next morning basically is a Sunday morning, which is a sort of informal Sabbath, Coverdale mentions. In fact, actually, he makes an interesting observation at the start of this chapter. He says, quote, "Our Sundays at Blithedale were not ordinarily kept with such rigid observance as might have befitted the descendants of the Pilgrims, whose high enterprise, as we sometimes flattered ourselves, we had taken up, and were carrying it onward and aloft to a point which they never dreamed of attaining." That's a really important, interesting insight, and I think one that's often sort of lost to us in the 21st century. The settlers of America, the Pilgrims, the Puritans, were, in a sense, leftist utopians, you could even say, undertaking to restart civilization. I mean, the problem is that we, thinking as, indoctrinated, 21st century materialists, we were taught to think of them as stodgy Christians, and so we have a tendency to think that they must have been right-wing. And yes, they were mostly, traditional, perhaps even to a fault, on matters of biblical morality, kind of legalist. But their politics were very much communitarian and even anti-capitalist. Unless that's, maybe, in a way that is too anachronistic of a label. But, for example, I remember reading one time in a book by Bernard Bailyn called The New England Merchants that they initially had maximum wage laws at times and sort of strange things going on like that about the just price theory and all that. these Puritans sought to share everything and to avoid materialism, and basically they would maybe have recognized the aspirations of the Blithedale types, even though the people at Blithedale had mostly dropped affiliation with Christianity, by the 1840s. Anyway, the tenants all go their separate ways on Sunday, some to church, others for a forest walk, whatever. Coverdale goes with Hollingsworth, Zenobia, and Priscilla out to a place in the woods called Eliot's Pulpit, which is really just a huge old rock. And they all kind of listen together to Hollingsworth give some lectures, probably about his prison reform stuff, and they, talk about whatever, lie around there kind of like bohemians. And then at one point, Zenobia brings up what she describes as, quote, the injustice which the world did to women. And she launches into a feminist speech it's historically really interesting. Coverdale goes right into simping mode for her and agrees with everything she says, that women should be liberated and so on. He even says to her at one point, quote, for instance, I should love dearly for the next 1,000 years at least to have all government devolve into the hands of women. I would kneel before a woman ruler. And then he says some drivel about envying the Catholics for how they put the divine feminine, meaning, Mother Mary, between themselves and the Lord. At this point, this is where Priscilla is kind of shocked mainly by not so much the feminism, although that, but by the Catholicism. She's like, Catholic? And so she interrupts and says to Hollingsworth, the alpha guy, she says, very innocently like a 17-year-old would, is it all true what Mr. Coverdale and Zenobia have been saying? Meaning basically like, is this feminist stuff good? And Hollingsworth, based and red pill as ever, says, no, Priscilla, they have neither of them spoken one true word yet. Zenobia flinches and demands of him, she says, do you despise women? And then Hollingsworth gives this paragraph-long speech that is just exactly out of one of those European beauty Twitter threads. I love it. I couldn't believe how appropriate it was to 2021. He goes, quote, and this is only part of it, quote, woman is the most admirable handiwork of God in her true place and character. Her place is at man's side, her office that of the sympathizer, the unreserved, unquestioning believer, etc., etc. All the separate action of woman is and ever has been and always shall be false, foolish, vain, destructive of her own best and holiest qualities. Man is a wretch without woman, but woman is a monster, and thank heaven, an almost impossible and hitherto imaginary monster, without man as her acknowledged principle. This is obviously a fun speech, but the best part is Coverdale, at this moment, expects the two girls to lash out at Hollingsworth and be angry, and to side with Coverdale's pussy hat wearing perspective, but instead, it says Zenobia, quote, only looked humbled. Some tears sparkled in her eyes, but they were wholly of grief, not anger. I'm not really sure what Hawthorne himself believed in all this, but he certainly has managed to draw up a scene that, Chateau Artiste would enjoy here. As they walk away, the four of them through the woods, Coverdale sees Zenobia clasp Hollingsworth's hand in an obvious gesture of love and longing. A true beta, Coverdale here takes this as an opportunity to insinuate himself into Priscilla's heart, because she's here like the rejected, I guess. But she blows him off too. Both of the women want nothing to do with feminist sympathizer Coverdale, and they both are clinging to, the traditional Hollingsworth. Great lesson here, I suppose. In chapter 15, Hollingsworth finally reveals his plan to Coverdale. Basically, he says he has the funds to buy all the land at Blithedale and to transform it into his prison reform program thing. Now, Coverdale suspects that he could only have the funds if he means to get them by marrying Zenobia. Then Hollingsworth says, basically like, are you in or out to Coverdale? And meaning, are you coming along for the project? And Coverdale summons all his courage here and says no. And it took him a lot of strength because, Hollingsworth is this like, he's got charisma and stuff. So his beta follower here, Coverdale, had to like muster the courage to say no, but he manages it. The reason he gives is that he doesn't believe in the viability of the program of prison reform, but he also seems a little jealous here about the girls probably, and I suspect that's why he's lashing out here at Hollingsworth. Basically, in this chapter, the guys have a fight and, sort of break off their friendship. So this prompts Coverdale to take a vacation. And as he's leaving, everybody has a sense that things are kind of falling apart on the farm. Even Farmer Silas, the old man who's teaching them how to farm, kind of tries to guilt him into staying. He says, look, your shoulders have grown 6 inches. You're very healthy. What do you need a break for, But Coverdale leaves. He heads back to the city. Pretty typical, by the way, of 19th century books for this movement back and forth between city and country to kind of signify. And I think it does here. So Coverdale, as he takes up some residence in like a hotel. And he gets very meditative in the next couple of chapters. To me, it was a really fun read. He says he takes up this temporary residence in a part of town where no one would likely recognize him. He gets a room on a 3rd floor, lights a fire, and starts smoking cigars while it's pouring rain outside. And he listens to all the sounds of the city. And he begins to reflect on city life versus the country life experiment he's been trying to run out at Blithedale. And he is overcome by this feeling of like in-betweenness, of being neither here nor there, of kind of having no place to belong in the world. And I think he's even feeling like, there are interesting questions in these chapters about like the self and selfhood, and do you have only one self? And if so, how do you discover it? And how do you stay faithful to it and all that stuff? At one point he says of his time at Blithedale, quote, I was beginning to lose the sense of what kind of world it was among innumerable schemes of what it might or ought to be. And it's an interesting point, right? Like this reminds me of some of the politics talk that you find on places like YouTube where everybody's got their, sort of schema or program or idea for reforming the world, and if you spend too much time with it, you can kind of like lose a grip on actually existing reality out there, I think. And so he makes a really interesting point here, and he says, and I feel like these words even are still meaning what he means them to mean. You'll be able to, you just have to translate it just a little in your head. He says, quote, no sagacious man will long retain his sagacity if he live exclusively among reformers and progressive people, without periodically returning into the settled system of things to correct himself by a new observation from that old standpoint. It was now time for me, therefore, to go and hold a little talk with the conservatives, the writers of the North American Review, the merchants, the politicians, the Cambridge men, and all those respectable old blockheads who still, in this intangibility and mistiness of affairs, kept a death grip on one or two ideas which had not come into vogue since yesterday morning. End quote. It's a really interesting idea, isn't it, that like the conservatives in the 1840s were basically getting steamrolled, but that they were effective as a place to return to, as like an anchor to remind yourself that some things don't, like basically you don't have to just go with the narrative every 10 years. So like I hope this underlines what I was trying to say in the last episode about how the 1840s were experiencing their own wokeness regime, replacing all the old values where everything old had to be discarded and replaced over the course of every 20 years. Anyway, Coverdale goes on smoking cigars, meditating for a day and a half, peering out the window. And as he looks, one of the homes that he can see out back, he sees a dove. I mean, this is one of these very romantic, very Hawthorne touches. A dove that keeps lingering on the trellis of one of the homes across the way. And he asks the bellman in the hotel if he knows anything about the residents there. He can kind of catch a glimpse of them in the window. His attention is drawn to this one house. He learns little from the bellman, but he keeps watching the house until, holy crap, through a window he sees, no mistaking it, Zenobia pacing back and forth. And Priscilla is with her. I mean, obviously it's an unbelievable coincidence, like kind of literally unbelievable. And if it were another writer, you would almost go like, oh, come on, this is too much. But this is exactly what Hawthorne talks about in his prefaces to all of his novels when he describes what a romance is. It's like he's basically saying, look, just give me a little leeway in terms of, imagining things that happen, because ultimately it's not about the plot. Like, I'm using the plot to get at more sophisticated ideas about human psychology. And so, okay, there's a little extraordinary coincidence, but I don't know. You get the idea. Like, just give him this so that we can get on with things. Okay. In one sense, Coverdale is frustrated, I think, at this moment that he should stumble back onto these people. I mean, he's wasted so much of his thought thinking about this love triangle of Zenobia and Priscilla and Hollingsworth, and it was just what he was trying to escape coming on vacation in the city. And then here it is, shoved back near to him again. But then, like, just as he's spying on them, I'm picturing, by the way, like maybe a 50-yard distance here or so, he sees Westervelt's face come up right behind Zenobia. And, I mean, remember, he met Westervelt out there in the woods that one time. He was the guy dressed super nice and really annoying and calling him friend and stuff, so he recognizes his face. And then Zenobia steps away from the window. Westervelt comes to the window and looks out, and he looks right at Coverdale. No mistaking it. And Coverdale, like, he sort of gives himself credit for not just slinking away like that Homer Simpson into the shrubs. He stays there and he keeps the gaze. And Westervelt, I mean, they clearly see each other. He's caught, And then Zenobia steps back to the window. Now she sees him also, looks kind of shocked, and gives him one of these, like, it's sort of a dismissive but also acknowledging wave at once. Okay, so at this point, I mean, now, like, he really doesn't know what to do. In fact, I think at one point it says he basically began to long for catastrophe or something like that. And he reminds me at this scene a lot of Ishmael in Moby Dick, by the way. Ishmael is mostly an observer, mostly a reporter, mostly just the narrator, a passerby, a non-participant. But it seems there are these moments where he gets his life entangled with the action of the drama. Basically, he moves from passerby to being like an active participant. And this sudden change of, from like passive to active participant, it kind of entangles him with the main actors in some scandalous, maybe even dangerous drama. So, but then he recalls, maybe this isn't such a bad situation after all. Technically, nothing has changed since I left the farm. I was on good enough terms with Zenobia, even though I got in this fight with Hollingsworth, her, almost boyfriend now. And now that she's seen me, I should just go call on her, as they do in the 19th century, right? So, in fact, that's the pro-social thing to do. So, he does it. He, gets dressed up, goes over to her place, and almost right away, he's in her residence there. It's weird energy right from the start. She is not slumming it at all anymore. Not playing the hippie like she was out on Blithedale Farm. Now, she's all dressed up in full upper-class attire. In fact, on the farm, she was always wearing a flower in her hair. Here, she's got a flower in her hair, but it's made out of jewels. So she's really, like, she looks elegant and rich and whatever. But he can't decide whether this is the real Zenobia or, and whether she was acting on the farm for those 3 months of summer, or whether, she was whether she's fake now, faking it now, like acting the part of the rich lady now, and she was the real self at Blithedale. Again, these themes of, is there one self authentic or not, sort of keep bubbling up here. Anyway, she welcomes him, but it feels kind of icy now. Like, she doesn't trust, there's some lack of trust, where on the farm, they could be, confidants. It doesn't feel like that in the city. When he questions her, specifically about which self is the true Zenobia, she says something that I think even the philosophers might consider here. She says, I should think it a poor and meager nature that is capable of but one test of forms, and must convert all the past into a dream merely because the present happens to be unlike it. And her point is that nobody really has full integrity. We all play our roles differently depending on the social situation. That's her claim, at least. I mean, I'm not sure that she's right. I used to talk to students about this question a lot, and I never really pinned it down. For me, I still retain integrity as, at the very least, a goal. Like, I want to be able to be the same person regardless of who I'm with or where I am or what the circumstance dictates. I want to be a self, you know. But it's not easy to do. Most of you will talk differently at work and with your grandma and, you know, with me and so on, because there are different social cues and all of that stuff. I will say that all of this is, again, very typical in Hawthorne. You know, this stuff about can our true selves be known? He always hints that it's very difficult, if not impossible, to know others. And if it is as difficult as he says, then, it seems to me at least, judging others is something that must be done with exceeding caution. And he shows this, I think, better in this novel than anywhere else, with Coverdale narrating. This is probably why it's written in the first person like this. Coverdale is a poet, remember, a very sensitive observer of people and events. And Coverdale is even partially cognizant of this problem. He claims that Hollingsworth and Zenobia could hardly have hoped for a better observer of their drama than himself. He swears that he would narrate generously, leaving out no merit, and understating any of their vices, and so on. And when he first speaks with Zenobia, he says to her, quote, "It is really impossible to hide anything in this world, to say nothing of the next. All that we ought to ask, therefore, is that the witnesses of our conduct and the speculators on our motives should be capable of taking the highest view which the circumstances of the case may admit." That is a super interesting point, and it's one that I've thought about a lot in my life. I mean, to be honest, like, I'm not always sure that people perceive me, you know, the right way. If there is a self, it feels sometimes like people perceive it the wrong way, or perceive my motives the wrong way, or my conduct they perceive not in full justice, you know? I mean, you have to weigh this against your own confidence in your own, like, self-perception. But, like, think back to Socrates and all those questions about whether you would rather be perceived as good, or, you know, or actually be good. Especially if by, you know, actually being good, that would mean that the world would misunderstand you and come to hate you and punish you, right? While the man who is inwardly a demon, but performs well enough for the world to perceive him as good, is hailed with rewards. Again, I'm not saying this is totally my story, or it's particularly my story, but I think it has been my story at times, and many of you have probably experienced this same feeling from time to time, that, like, people got you wrong, you know? Okay, so Coverdale, I mean, do we trust him? Do we trust his assessment of the events of the novel, right? He's the only access point we have. He's the one telling us what's happening. You know, is he perceiving it rightly? That evening, he speaks with Priscilla, who also seems especially mysterious now in the city. She's dressed all in white and seems aloof or distant. He asks them both about Hollingsworth. The second time, Zenobia's eyes flash like, what are you at? You know, she's mad about it. And then Westervelt, who is there with the women, kind of comes into the room and says, "It's time to go, ladies." And they, you know, again, all dressed up, elegant, walk out with him, almost arm in arm, to some engagement. But Zenobia, like, does that cold, she, like, doesn't want to hold his hand. So she goes with him, but she's pissed about it. And, I mean, I'm not sure, we don't really know what's going on there. So, again, what's the situation? Like, what is going on here? Well, there's a moment where Coverdale is warned against speaking of Hollingsworth, as I said, by Zenobia. And he says something about having a duty, like, because these were his friends or something, and so he's trying to, like, make sure everybody's okay. But Zenobia snaps at him, to hell with your duty, shove it up your ass, basically. And then she says, beware, sir, with all your fancied acuteness of perception, you step blindfolded into these affairs. For any mischief that may follow your interference, I hold you responsible. It's a really tense moment. As a reader of the book, my hunch here is that Coverdale thought he was only narrating or observing, but he sort of stumbled into becoming part of the action. It reminds me of that Cary Grant movie, Rear Window, maybe? Where he's just looking out the window and he sees a murder or something. I mean, anyway, this is also like a really interesting principle of psychology for us to consider. I mean, when in your life do you go from safely observing life, and maybe gossiping about it, but like you're on the margins, to being dangerously involved in it? And is it possible to kind of slide into that active, dangerous role without even knowing it? Like you think you're still on the margins, but oops, you're on stage now, right? Another example, of course, is Tom Cruise in Eyes Wide Shut, where he thinks he's just going to a costume party, but he kind of stumbles out of his lane and into something where the stakes are a lot higher than he was ready for. So this is part of the vibe of what's going on with Coverdale at this point in the story. Okay. At this point, Coverdale feels numb, basically doesn't know what to do with himself, but he does remember old Moody's interest in the girls, and he knows the pub where Moody likes to hang out. So Coverdale goes there. He wants to find out like the whole story. There's a really long, interesting description of the pub, by the way, including some paragraphs on drinking as a human habit and the temperance movement, which was big, at this time. And there's even some analysis of the still life paintings on the walls and all that kind of stuff. But eventually, Moody shows up. Coverdale knows that Moody is a kind of like mysterious introvert type of a guy and a tough nut to crack. But of course, he wants to get the whole scoop on Priscilla and Zenobia, and so he wonders if getting the old guy drunk on wine might loosen his lips. And sure enough, it does. The next chapter is called Fauntleroy. And it's a pretty common narrative device that you'll see in 19th century novels. Basically, it's this like slow burn revelation where the narrator sort of knows that you'll be able to piece together the parts as he tells it, but he still kind of tells it as a mystery. So basically what we're reading is Coverdale's retelling of the tale that the increasingly drunken old Moody relates. And the story is about, or begins about, a wealthy man from the Middle States named Fauntleroy, who apparently did something bad because he was in danger of running out of funds. And what he did, we don't exactly know, but it's some sort of, Bernie Madoff style thing, I guess. And it basically horrified everyone. And his shame for this, this scandal scheme thing was so great that he disappeared, took another name, his wife died, and his only daughter, well, what became of her? And you see, like somewhere around here, as you're reading the story about Fauntleroy, you begin to realize that Fauntleroy is actually old Moody himself, and that his daughter is Zenobia. Okay, because then it says he remarried. He married a second time this poor servant girl and had another daughter by her now. And the second one is, described as pale and weak. And so obviously this is Priscilla. So interesting background story, right? Like this guy, old Moody with the patch, who wanders around and asks about Zenobia and Priscilla and wants to know that Zenobia is taking good care of Priscilla, is their dad, it turns out. Okay, so And there's a lot going on there in terms of like the, sort of like the genetic inheritance or something. Like basically Priscilla is, she has pauper genes, it seems, whereas Zenobia is like a true, almost royal. And that partially describes sort of the difference in their character there, I guess. All right, so whatever. Then the chapter also mentions something about Westervelt, the sleaze bag with the gold teeth and the gold chain and the white shirt and stuff. But it doesn't really clarify what exactly is going on with him. Somehow the people in the neighborhood who live with Priscilla at this time when she's young become convinced that she's like otherworldly and preternatural. And the gossip is that she can see people's futures and, know their secrets and stuff. And so as that gossip becomes widely known, that's when Westervelt shows up. So there's a sense that like maybe he's going to be like her carnival handler or something. But it really isn't, it's not clear at this point in the story as it's told by Old Moody / Fauntleroy. All right. We'll put a pin in it there. You guys are good sports for putting up with the with the 3 episodes we've done so far on the Blithedale Romance and one more, and I'll finish it on the next one. I know it's a book you never felt you needed to know anything about, but it's fun for me to go over it again. I haven't read it in 10 years. I'm enjoying it. The next episode will feature the harrowing conclusion of the Blithedale Romance. Give me a few days. And then some other business on the podcast. I also ordered my copy, I think I mentioned this, of Plutarch's Greek Lives. That arrived. So I'll get to reading about Lycurgus as soon as the Hawthorne series ends. And I think what I'll do, there's like 9 different Greek lives narrated there or so. And I'm going to probably do episodes on the ones that are interesting to me anyway. So rather than try to do like a whole episode on Plutarch in 45 minutes, which seems impossible, I'll just take it kind of chapter by chapter. And the other thing is, that Arval video that I mentioned at the beginning was about like the intuition. You guys should watch it, first of all, and subscribe. Like, Arval's the best YouTuber. And certainly my intellectual superior. Like, this is one of the reasons I watch him, and I try to think about what he's saying, and I always find it challenging and interesting. And sometimes, like, I'm best at understanding Arval when he says, for example, and then he gives me like a dumbed down version of what he's saying. But in this episode, he was talking about how he's talking about the reason, with like a capital R in the Platonic sense, and how and about intuition, and about how like in our gut we get these feelings, and these things do reflect, he says, something about reality, like, or else they wouldn't be there. And so your emotions, your sentiment, your feeling, these things matter and are not to be totally disregarded, but that ultimately reason can be better trusted, I think he says, something like that. Now, I know I'm leaving parts of this out, and you should go watch his video rather than my stupid summary of it, but I still am, I was thinking about it just in relation to Hawthorne, because part of what Hawthorne is saying in this book seems to be that, like, for example, no matter how rational your plan for starting a commune is, ultimately the reason in it is trumped by these irrational impressions that we get from, our emotion or our baser instincts, basically. So like the love triangle between Zenobia and Priscilla and Hollingsworth kind of throws off what's happening on the commune. And I don't know, like I always return to Romans chapter 7, where Paul talks about sin, right? Sin being almost a thing. Like Paul's self kind of falls apart in chapter 7 of Romans, and all that's left is sin and Christ acting in me, right? So that's all that's left. Like basically, if you're doing good, it's not you who are doing it anymore. It's the Logos doing it through you, right? It's Christ in you, he says. Whereas when you're acting like a basic level, once born human being, a mortal, it's basically sin acting in you. And I find this really interesting because, a lot of times, like I feel like the Puritans get a lot of trash. Like the Puritans, they kind of inherited their Calvinism, and they were sort of sin obsessed. And a lot of times, like it's like what we take that to mean in the 21st century, where we've grown up in this licentious era where liberty is always the byword. It's like the way that was given to us as children is like these Puritan, it's like it's almost an insult just to say puritanical. But really part of what they're doing is to try to keep in mind the undeniable, crucial importance of keeping the idea of sin almost primary in our understanding of human psychology, because it turns out, at least this was their judgment, and I think it's mine and Hawthorne's too, that it's like we would watch this Arville video and go like one of the examples that he gave that stuck in my mind was the example of like indiscretion in terms of like flirting with somebody you're not supposed to. So you're married, or she's married, or or whatever. You're Romeo and Juliet, and you're not supposed to flirt, but like there's a part of you, the emotion, that kind of pulls you in the direction and that makes an excuse for you, and like you may think that your reason is going to stop you from kind of pulling the trigger when the moment presents itself, but at that point, it's like you're overwhelmed by the irrational, and the intuition gets the better of you here. And so, I don't know, like, unless I'm misunderstanding him, but like of course, the solution, you say, like, well, what you should do is listen to logos in that situation. What you should do is listen to reason and do the thing that you know is good rather than what feels good at the moment. But this seems to be like an irreducible first primary faculty in the human mind that we can't always do that. I guess I tend to think of it in terms of the will, being worn down. Like you can listen to logos most of the time, most days, but then because it uses a muscle to listen to logos, to listen to reason, and eventually our intuitions catch us off guard. We relax for a minute, we stop listening to the logos, and that's when we make these poor decisions. Which isn't to say I'm disagreeing, I think, with Arville. It's like, yes, like as moral instruction, this is the correct thing to tell people. But like as far as like organizing society, there does, I think, need to be a mechanism or something for like managing the reality that people don't actually, or like aren't actually able to organize their lives according to reason consistently. And I think that's part of what Hawthorne is on about in the Blithedale Romance. And that's about all the time I have for this episode. I'll see you next time for the harrowing conclusion of an 1852 book by one of America's best writers, Nathaniel Hawthorne. See you later.